I don't know about you, but I was overwhelmed by that first hour, and I'm as certain that these next 3 hours are going to be equally incredible for all of you that have the opportunity to listen to these incredible people that will be our speakers. So let's move into our second hour by introducing our speakers. Deb Martinez. Deb is the Chief Executive Officer for the Mission of Love's charities in Washington, D.C. area. Deb has an extensive background as an association and not-for-profit executive, implementing and creating educational opportunities and collaborations with underrepresented and mainstream populations. She is committed to making the world a better place. Deb is joined by Jason Freeman, an author, speaker, and imperfect best coach. Jason would tell us that wherever he goes to speak to audiences of all types and in many different places, yes, he absolutely brings, with 100% commitment, his speech impediment. When he appears, he bears witness to living his dream. He helps us to see our dreams, that they are closer and more attainable than we might feel. The next speaker is Coach Jim Johnson, who helps business leaders and educators build championship teams. He certainly knows about leadership as a basketball coach for many years, but he also knows about the importance of inclusion told through the story of one of his high school basketball teams. Our next speaker in this hour is Claudine Champion. Claudine is a transformational leader and a motivational speaker. She works very hard in many roles to get to the root cause of culturally based challenges by transforming beliefs, behaviors, and assumptions. And lastly, Pierre Quinn. For the past 15 years, Pierre has taught higher education, faith-based, nonprofit, and corporate leaders the strategies they need to experience personal success and professional growth. I'm so honored to have all five of these folks with us for this second hour, and our topic is inclusion. Got a series of questions. It's going to be rapid fire. If you all are ready to go, then let's get at it. So here's the first question. I want to go around. Everybody answer this question if you could. So the question is, could inclusion simply be acknowledging that each human being is different from every other human being? Deb, could it be that simple? You're muted. You're muted.
It definitely could be. And first of all, I want to say thank you, Dennis, for allowing me to be here. I am also thrilled and appreciate this opportunity. I think that inclusion could be readily accepted if people were accepting of everything. You know, we tend to want to be not so pleasant to our everyday fellow man. And right now, where I'm currently working in the Mission of Love charities, we see a population that nobody really wants to help, and that's the homeless. We have a large homeless population. So when you say inclusion, you know, I see all kinds of opportunities and how we can befriend and be nice. And I think it's not an easy answer, but it could be so easy and so accepting.
Good. Thanks, Deb. Claudine?
Well, I would say yes, it is. And I'm, I'm trying to think about how to say this. I'm just going to say what came in my mind is that my mom told me that in order for me to be included, I have to first feel like I belong. So it was really important that she took me to places so that I learned how to feel like I belonged wherever I was. Because she said, anywhere that you are, that you want to be, you should be there. So I think it starts with recognizing that you belong in the space that you're in, and owning it. And then people will willingly, well, I don't know. I think people will willingly accept you if you walk into a room like you own it. That's what I'm going to say based on my experience. Because I think everybody, I mean, this is our basic need to feel included. And I think like dogs recognize when someone's afraid, and that's the person that they go to. I think when people walk into spaces where they don't feel welcome, it's almost like you're inviting people to bring up the worst part of themselves. But when you walk in like you own it, people want to know who you are, and I think confident. I don't know. I think that's what I'm trying to say in the shortest way possible. And thank you, Dennis, for having me here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, Claudine. Totally glad you're here. Jim, what do you think? Is it simply acknowledging human beings are different from each other? You're muted, Jim. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Ironically, because the most joyous night I ever had in coaching basketball for over 3 decades was actually the anniversary is today, 16 years ago. And
Wow.
I learned a lot from a young man that was on the autism spectrum. And about the importance of inclusion, because we all do have differences, but we also have a lot of fundamental sameness. And I think that's something we've got to be aware as leaders, is that the people definitely have differences, but we all have things like wanting to be accepted and wanting to be loved from your last session that are so essential. Including people is something that's really powerful, and it's something that we have to understand, that we do have differences, but we also have a lot of the sameness, and we have to respect all people.
Good. Very good. Pierre.
I think it's simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy, right? Like, I think it's simple, but I don't think it's always as easy as we frame it, for a couple of reasons. One, it's hard for me to project toward other people something I don't fully believe about myself. I want to connect to what Claudine was saying. In part of my background in the ministry space, I found in congregational leadership and dealing with people in a church environment, some of the harshest people to deal with were the ones that were super rigid towards other people. And they were super rigid towards other people because there was a part of themselves that they did not love and accept.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as a baseline, it could be as simple as acknowledging that we're all different. But I think to move it forward, we have to come to a place where we accept our own individual differences and uniqueness, and say that it's valid for me to share that with the world. And once I begin to embrace that, I think I can do a much better job of embracing the differences and different people around me. Good.
Well said. Jason.
Well, everyone has says such beautiful things about this important subject. I would add that I think it's inclusion is a more obligation, but also it's important to realize that inclusion is in our own best interest. We feel better when we include other people and include ourselves. It feels painful to isolate and say, no, I'm not talking to you because you're different, or no. But when we are open and find that strength in ourselves, like everyone else is saying, to really include all parts of ourselves and how we experience ourselves, then we exude that. It just is connective, and great conversations are born like the conversations Dennis has created today.
Good. Thanks, Jason. So, one of the things that I've said fairly often, actually, and I think it touches on several things that have been said, and that is the answer to this question. And the question is, what is one thing that each and every person attending this event today on screen right now has in common with every other person? And Jim used the word sameness. I would use the phrase to say that we are different from each other. And that is something we have in common. And I think that just gets us to the door and opens the door to thinking about why inclusion does not have to be a problem. as it is for a lot of folks. So my next question is why does this seeming reality divide us? This whole notion of inclusion, why does it impair relationship and act as a source of unhappiness? Why is that happening? Claudine, let's start with you. Why is that happening?
I'm going to go back to what I initially said, that when people, well, actually, it's what the previous panel said about loving yourself. Everything that we do, everything that drives how we show up in the world starts with how we see ourselves, how we value ourselves, how we love ourselves. And so if you didn't grow up in a home where you heard I love you, where you felt that you were loved, it's a lot easier to pick at and find reasons to dislike someone else. But when I go back to just kind of the upbringing that I had and the fact that my mother put me in a position where I was the only Black person in a lot of white spaces. And, I was uncomfortable initially, but the more I was in those spaces, the more comfortable I got. And now it doesn't matter where I am. I feel like I belong there because I know that I belong in the world, that I know that I have love. I know that I'm the love that I want to see in the world. And so I think that helping people connect with themselves and love themselves will begin to start transforming the way that we interact with each other, because there is so much beauty in our differences. There's so much power in us being able to connect in spite of our differences, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you take to the necessary higher level. The old conversation, recently, was around a word that we call diversity, and yeah, I know, I agree.
Sorry.
I'm seeing the smirks. I'm seeing all the smirks around that word. It's a beautiful word in all the wrong ways, but inclusion takes us to a different place, and it's also a higher challenge and a higher calling. Pierre, what are your thoughts about this issue of how it divides us and makes things more difficult?
Well, when you look at marketing, it's the reality is that it sells. Division sells. Fear of missing out sells. And sometimes it's a struggle for us because we come to the place where we're not comfortable or even content with, because my experience is not yours, that does not mean I necessarily have to have your experience in order for me to be valid. And it happens all the time. Your neighbor gets a new car. There's something about you that looks at your car. And you say, I don't like it as much. A friend moves into a new house. You look at your apartment or your townhouse and you say, I don't like it as much. So we live in a world that has really leveraged and found a way to monetize this feeling of being different and other than, instead of us coming to the place where I'm okay with my differences and I respect and validate your differences without the diminishing of my own. So there's a lot of money being made as we look at the differences that we all have.
Really great observation. Deb, what are your thoughts?
I'm actually quite impressed with what Pierre said, because I was thinking similarly. I had a strong mother, and growing up, we grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, a lot of military families. But I have to say, he nailed it when he said, you just look at other people and you say, oh gosh, why don't I have that? And, or, why does he get this? And, well, gosh, I don't like my shoes that I have on today because she's got on Ferragamos and I don't have those. And so I think the other piece of this is that we have to be happy with ourselves. We have to be strong within our own self and understand that each and every one of us has something to be added to society, to humanity. I think we've lost that so much, and it's so hard to try to even get it back. I think COVID has just exacerbated how we feel so different. And we all should realize no one wants COVID, but people that get it, how are we going to address it? And how are we going to treat people like they're not the plague and try to help them and be more humanistic and be more objective to what their needs and thoughts are? I just have to say, Pierre, I've seen that every day since the time I was 8 years old and can remember. Someone get a new car. My dad wanted a new car. Someone get a new house. Oh, we need to move to a bigger house. Instead of just being really happy with what you have and trying not to be so competitive, but to be appreciative.
Mhm.
I have to say that.
I've got to say, I keep hearing the blue ribbon coming in my mind. You know, who I am makes a difference. Who I am makes a difference. I think it's such an incredibly powerful thought.
Absolutely.
Jim, what are your thoughts on this question? I want you to, if you can, relate this to, because I think this, one of the reasons I thought you'd be wonderful having this conversation is based on where you had your career, and in particular, the story of that young man that you came to know, and who did some miraculous things in a basketball game. And I really think it's helpful to think about that when we talk about inclusion. So share your thoughts around that, if you could.
Sure. So my first thought is I think as a person, and a few of the others addressed this quite well, is that, what are your most important core values? And for me, one of my most was that I really took a lot of pride in respecting all people. And then secondly, is that because my expertise was putting together teams. I coached for over 30 years, and the huge thing is when you're putting a team together, you're looking for differences. You're looking for different strengths and how you can use the strengths of each particular person on the team to, the word is synergize. The whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. And I think that's something that you're really trying to develop, in building a team, is how can I use the various differences of the people on the team to then synchronize to make it a even better team. And as a leader, I think that's really, really important. Share very briefly, the story Dennis mentioned is I had a young man named Jason McElwain that's on the autism spectrum. And he tried out for our team 3 consecutive years and did not make it, but he served as our team manager. And the thing that I really learned from Jason was that, first of all, I wanted to have him part of it because he deserved to be part of it because of all his time, his commitment, his caring and love for his fellow teammates. And he wanted to do anything to help us become a more effective team. And that was a great lesson I learned. Here's a young man that never actually played until our final home game, the senior year. That became a very magical night that blew up all over the world. But the greatest lesson is that Jason deserved to be part because he can contribute with his differences.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Jason, the imperfect coach. What are your thoughts?
It's I love how Jim says that on a team he looks for differences. And I found as an individual that lesson has been so hard for me to get, especially when I was young. Like as a teenager, I hated having a speech impediment and coordination differences. Just hated the fact that every time I spoke, there was difference within me, and so much healing has come into my life from understanding that I can share the difference I am and be proud of my voice, and it helps people in a certain way. It's not about me just speaking up because that's my voice and that's my right to speak up. Is about me sharing this voice because it's a difference, and it adds something to the conversation. So like we've all been, or a lot of us have been saying, it's kind of inclusion is so much inside job inside of each one of us, and yet at the same time doing everything we can to welcome others into the game, into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. I don't even notice your speech impediment anymore. So if that matters, I just I hear your words, and I feel your emotion, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and that's why you're a powerful voice to so many people, my friend.
When you say that, Dennis, you're kind of stomping on my brand, but that's okay.
I'm sure that humor was probably Steve Farber approved humor. That's a good thing. Yeah, well said, my friend. Well said. All right, so let's move on to another question. This conversation is incredible. Why? Maybe these questions are so straightforward. Why is inclusion vital to society? Why is it so important? And we're having such a difficult. Why is it so important, Claudine?
Because we came here on this planet to be connected. And somebody figured out that we shouldn't be connected. We should be divided for some dumb reason. But if you notice, and I'll use my experience in Ghana as an example. So in Ghana, soccer, I think a lot in Europe, soccer is a big thing, right? Europe and Africa. So when Nigeria and Ghana play each other, it's like volatile in the stands, right? They're fighting against each other and for the sake of the sport. But then when it's over, everybody comes back together, right? It's as if we don't have opposing teams that are gonna divide us. Mm-hmm. And I use that as an example because in the States, we've got football fans. And just like with politics or religion or any other thing that is intended to divide us, we're so staunchly attached to that thing that has nothing to do with us. Nothing about football is going to move us forward as humanity, right? But it's like we hold on to these things as if they matter so much. And again, I go back to, if people loved themselves, then the thing that would be most important was that they could be the love they want to see, be the love they want to see in the world. And then in spite of our differences, in spite of our sports teams or religion or politics, we could still love each other and care about each other enough that inclusion would just come naturally. Why is it that people can go to a party and have a great time and none of those things that divide us is on the table until somebody mentions it, and all of a sudden you go from having a great time to now you don't want to talk to that person anymore? And I say one of the things that we need to do as human beings is when we get into a space with someone and we may not necessarily, we're having a great time and then something comes up that maybe flicks our ear or makes us feel uncomfortable, stay in the conversation. I just drove cross country from California to Georgia, and I talked to people about love along the way. And unfortunately, some white people feel the tendency to other me when they talk. They remind me that I'm Black as if I didn't remember that when I woke up. And some people were on a political different side than I am. But what I recognized is if I just stay in the conversation, the magic that happened on the other side of it was so beautiful. And now I got to figure out a way to teach other people to do this, because we got to get over this. This is nonsensical. It is 2022. And I thought by now we'd be living like back in the future. Remember when Marty went into the future and they were like driving, hover cars and everybody was getting along except for Marty and his friend. Maybe Back to the Future wasn't a good example. But just the fact that 2022 should not feel like 1965 or 1960 or 1950. How did we go backward? And they say if you don't learn from history, you'll continue to repeat it. So I think the history that we need to learn has nothing to do with the racial history, but the history of who we are as humanity and why we are here on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well
All
said.
right, I'm gonna stop now.
No, nobody's. No, this is all good. I'm having a heck of a good time. Pierre, what are your thoughts? Why is inclusion vital?
When you consider this panel, this hour, and then the previous one, right? The amount of synergy and interaction that we saw in the first hour, and the amount of synergy that we're experiencing here in this second hour, does not happen unless people feel like they belong here. It just doesn't happen. And when you think from a societal perspective, this is the reason why we're not getting the best out of people. We're not getting the best. We're not maximizing value. We're not prioritizing relationships because we have these paradigms, be it driving across country, and ending up in a place where you don't exactly feel welcome, managing a program, giving a presentation and someone pointing out your differences. We have these moments where we don't feel like we belong, or we don't feel like we're supported. We don't feel like we're safe. We have whole HR departments managing these tensions. And the more we don't embrace the fact that we need to continue to model and create opportunities for people to feel like they belong here, and the more we're going to have these paradigms where we never get the best out of each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't it interesting that the latest buzz acronym is DEI? If they just flipped a couple of letters, what they're really doing is something quite different. Just move that E up one spot, and you've changed the entire meaning of that, and then you got a real problem on your hands, because we're trying to move forward by looking backward. And I think that, but it satisfies somebody's objective. It's a goal. It's this, it's that, but it doesn't necessarily do anything to bring about the healing of the bridges and opening up the paths to a better way of thinking and feeling about one another. Deb, your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about what you guys were saying, and I thought about my first interaction on a college campus and seeing all of the different people and the interracial people and the kids that were coming from overseas, and just the element of we're here at a higher learning educational opportunity, and you see people from everywhere. And you come from I came from DC, and even though DC is a large city to a large degree, it's small and a small-minded. To be honest with you, it's very small-minded in a very specific manner. Surrounded by Prince George's County and Montgomery County and parts of Northern Virginia. We didn't even go to other areas growing up that much, even though we could have, because my mother was the type that would take us. But when I got on a college campus and I began to see people, and I said, oh my gosh, look at this. This is just so wonderful. And I agree with Claudine that in 2022, we've not grown that much to just want to accept people. When I was 18 and walked on this campus, I didn't really look at color like, unfortunately families teach you, or, race to that degree. But I said, this is something that is just amazing. We're all here to get this education and to learn more and to appreciate more and to understand. And then you grow up and you have children and you're married, and you say it's 2022 and we're still at the same steps, when we really have to take a step back and say, if today one of you all on this call knows that I need a kidney, I'm going to certainly ask for it. I don't care what your race is. And that's part of what I look at when I look at why we are so separate and not together. Why we can't be more friendly and loving and treat people with respect and honor. We don't even respect our elders. And we were raised to, that elders had, yeah, you would say, oh, grandma's in there talking. But I just think we've lost so much, and we've got to gain some of this back to give it back to our children and our grandchildren. I can really say that I sometimes sit back and think, what happened to those days of people from African nations, Asian countries, European countries, South America, going to college and how we looked at it and how we fared well. It's just, I just think we have to look at how we can do better as humans and how we can do better in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And that's what I have to say.
Yeah, and I'd say that many conversations like this can only be helpful if they're presented. So
Opening the door to just having some type of free space, and I think that's what a lot of the younger kids, 18 to 24, that kind of feel a little lost, or they're experiencing COVID and being set in their homes and not knowing what to do. The only thing they have is these cell phones,
mhm.
these gaming and all that, and they have to learn to start talking to one another. I mean, they have to start learning to really engaging in people as humans and not as machines,
Yeah. Yeah.
and feeling that they are somebody and that someone is going to listen, and that we do care about them.
Yeah. Jason, why is inclusion vital to society, my friend?
It's vital on a macro level because like to solve the problems of today, just like the problems of yesterday were solved by groups of people, all types of people. No one person solved all the problems of the 1940s or the 1950s, or no one person ever solves all the problems. So to innovate solutions, we must include each other on a macro level. And on a personal level, I mean, I could have lived a life if I wasn't included in life, if classmates in grade school and high school didn't include me, if people in the workplace didn't include me, if I wasn't included on summits like this, if I wasn't given a chance to speak to audiences, my life would have been very, very small and very lonely. Inclusion, in a large measure, has saved my life. I'm so grateful, and I do my imperfect best to pay the gift of inclusion forward, and I'm still learning every day more about including other people, and I'm not always great at it. Sometimes I'm egocentric and focused on my own thing, but I'm trying.
I think just keep it up. You're doing a pretty good job. That's all I got to say. Jim, what do you think? Why is it vital? Why are we talking about it?
I think it's vital, in society, for the world, going back to the team dynamic. Our core value, or one of our major core values, was we over me. And, to illustrate that, going back to that game, when J-Mac entered the game, we had some real turmoil during the season. And even though the players had liked him, one of the things we always talked about, we over me, is how can we shine the light on each other? And my proudest moment, for those that don't know the story, Jason actually got in the game and ended up, when the smoke cleared, he scored 20 points in less than 4 minutes, including 6 3-pointers. And it was certainly amazing. But you know what? One of the things that warmed my heart the dearest was I had never asked the players on the floor to pass Jason the ball, yet in those last 4 minutes, they passed the ball to him every time. As I've kidded people, when I still see Jason a lot, and I say, Jason, when are we going to get your first assist? You didn't pass the ball once. But I think the beauty of that is the fact that our players were willing to shine the light on him that night, and he had a beautiful night. And then 3 weeks later, Jason's dream was to be part of a Section 5 championship. And at that point in my career, we had never won one. And 3 weeks later, we ended up winning. But the ironic thing is, Jason had to go back as our team manager, yet he embraced that. And the beauty of that is, we've been interviewed hundreds of times since that game. And Jason is often asked, like, what was the best thing about your senior season? And of course, they are anticipating that he's going to talk about his game. And he says, winning the Section 5 championship. And the funny part is I was fortunate to be, after that year, I ended up winning a number of championships. And people ask me what was the best thing about my coaching career. I say Jason's game. So that just gives you a perspective of the ability, and I think inclusion is so important when we talk about using that concept of we over me and how can we shine the light on other people.
Yeah. Yeah. A question, a couple of thoughts and questions from one of our panelists from the first hour, I think need to get into this conversation mix. The first question is, do you believe that ethnic studies, learning about each other, can help with inclusion? Is one question. Pierre, what about you? What do you think? Can that help?
I used to teach college freshmen. And after a couple of years of teaching a intro to communication course, I noticed a pattern. Students would come into the classroom, sit in the same seat every class period, and navigate that 50 minutes as best as they could. It was one particular semester I said, I'm going to change things a bit. So I told the students every single class period, and this lasted for or maybe about a month or so. I said, every single class period, you have to sit in a different seat. I need you to see the room from a different perspective. And I need you to sit next to a different person. Well, that went on for a couple of weeks. And I noticed as they were changing seats, no one was really talking to each other. So they had the policy part of what I was suggesting down, but the action transformation part wasn't taking place. So I remember coming into class one day and just standing there. And they were asking me, so what are we going to talk about today? And I said, I'm not going to talk about anything, but you're going to talk to each other. And they looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, you've been sitting in a different seat, seeing the room from a different perspective and being next to different people for the past month. You haven't had really a lot of conversations I haven't told you to stop talking one time over the past month. Mm-hmm. So this class period and the next class period, we're going to practice this is an intro to communication course. We're going to practice talking to each other. And the dynamic of the course changed because they took a few moments to get to know each other. And when that happens, I've done this in corporate environments as well. I actually did it with a client a couple of months ago. When they start sharing stories, they realize just how similar they were. Different majors coming from different parts of the world, different socioeconomic status, different perspectives and worldviews. But as they started sharing stories, I watched over the next several weeks the class grow closer together and to really do some amazing work, all because they were talking to each other. Communication was actually taking place. We were learning about backgrounds and experiences and challenges and realizing, like Claudine said, we're all here to connect with each other. And there's a lot of spaces where we just don't do that. We're working, we're interacting, we're passing each other, but we're not connecting. And connecting necessitates that I learned a piece of your story and where you come from.
That's terrific. A thought comes to mind. Do you think that, and this may be generational, but do you think that some folks just rest on a form of bias by simply saying to themselves, if not uttered out loud, you don't look like me? Claudine?
Yes.
I know you have something to say about this.
I'm just going to say yes. And again, I go back to self because I like that drive I took cross country. I didn't look like a lot of people that I talked to. I think individually, people want that connection, right? When I went up to total strangers and said, can I talk to you about love? a couple people said, "What kind of love?" Like they wanted the clarification. But when I said agape love, like the love we should have for one another, they were like, "Yeah," and everyone agreed. So I don't think that individually, again, if people feel like you actually care enough to talk to me and you want to hear what I have to say, it doesn't matter that we're different. And I'm, people that know me, I'm talking to total strangers, but those who don't know me, I'm 6 feet tall. So I've been told that I have a commanding presence. So if I'm talking to somebody that's 5 feet tall and they're learning about Black people is that we're violent and scary, talking to me made whatever perceptions they may have had fall by the wayside. And I could tell because they stopped focusing on our differences. We found commonality in the conversation, and then it didn't even matter that I was 6 feet and they were 5 feet and I'm Black and they're white.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the South and I'm from California. Like all the things that could have differentiated me in those spaces fell by the wayside. So my long answer to that question is yes.
Yeah. Jim, any thoughts?
I think the power of learning, the more that we can learn about each other and build relationships is so powerful in building, teams, organizations, and therefore getting to know each other. And I think one of the best things that we can do as people is be willing to ask questions and focus on listening and learning more about each person. And once you get a more appreciation of where this person came from a different background, what are they all about? We used to do that as a team wraparound. Tell us something about you that no one knows about. And we would get some really interesting dialogue about that. But boy, the more that people opened up and realized that, yes, we have different backgrounds, we have different ideas, but let's unite and really show that we care about each other by learning more about each other. And to me, that's the power of asking questions and being willing to listen.
Yeah. Deb, thoughts?
I'm going to say that in my 8th grade science class, which I hated, and I never forget this man's name, Mr. Black, who was a science geek, used to say to me and to the whole class, the only way you will make a change is to learn and to listen and to be appreciative. I thank Mr. Black to this day for teaching us that.
Mm-hmm.
He opened up the door for us to, first of all, 8th graders, 34 8th graders in a class was like hell on wheels. And this man took us every day and taught us science. Dennis, I've worked with engineering for half of my career.
Mm-hmm.
I probably wouldn't have even thought of that had I not stopped, learned, and listened. And in that listening, we would talk about other kids, what you did for the summer, what you did for the weekend. It's just you sit back and you look and you say, wow, who made a big change in my life? Mr. Black was a very short African-American teacher. We were in a totally, basically minority school, but we did have Caucasian teachers, but I have to say that man changed my life in school because I had no intention of listening to him. I had made it my mind not to listen, but I ended up appreciating him and school from that point on. So I do think it has a lot to do with listening, learning, and then expressing and having a better relationship with your fellow man.
Gosh, we sound pretty wise, don't we? It's but I know, because I know all of you, at least a little bit, if not a lot, that you're not reading words off a piece of paper. That these are not only things that you know about, but you also have feelings about them. And I think that's what's so powerful. One of the other questions that Starla posed here, which we've been talking about already, but I'll pose it anyway. We've got a little bit of time. How do we transcend the myths, lies, stereotypes that we've learned about each other? And I put them all under the caption of unconscious and other forms of bias And the unconscious bias is the one that's so damaging because we didn't even know it was happening to us from birth all the way into adulthood. How do we transcend all that stuff? What is it just listening, or is there more an active thought or strategy you may have to try to deal with that? Pierre, let's start with you. I used to go to Claudine, but she's controversial.
She was ready though. She was forming.
I was ready.
She was.
Yeah, I know. It's the other reason why I didn't go to you right away. Sorry.
In this world that we live in right now, and it's so, I think it's so much easier to do this than maybe in years past. It's easy for me to see your profile, to see Jason's profile or Jim's profile or Deb's profile, and click on it, on LinkedIn or on Facebook or whatever you're watching this, and say, hey, I was intrigued by what you said. I'd love to sit down and hear more of your story. I'd love to everybody does, right? All of us click on my link and get a free 15-minute discovery call or free 30-minute consulting session, all the stuff that we say and do on our websites. I think part of that being more intentional is recognizing where I, as an individual, may have a bias, may have a disadvantaged point of view, and then what are the steps? And the steps are, who can I talk to really check my bias? I have a difficult time with basketball coaches, and recognizing that for some of us, it is related to a negative past experience with one person that we've put into a particular profile. So I don't like basketball coaches because my 8th grade basketball coach was a complete jerk. So anytime I see the word coach or I see a basketball, I just freak out. That could be the case. And to say, what was it? Is it really all coaches, or is it just that negative experience? And you know what? I'm going to take a vulnerability chance. And I see this coach, Jim Johnson. I'm going to reach out to him, and I'm going to get his story and get his perspective and test my hypothesis. Sometimes we're not as willing to test the hypothesis. And so we put people into those stereotypical buckets, all people, all things, all situations, which all of us know is never the case.
Jim, I would let you talk next, but I don't think you have to have a rebuttal opportunity there. So I'm going to go to Claudine first and see what's on her mind. Claudine?
I was good. Okay. So here's what I'm going to say. 2 things. One is that I don't really believe in unconscious bias. And here's why I'm going to tell you that. Our bodies are wired to connect with each other. So when we do something that is biased consciously, we feel it. And I think anyone who has ever, I'll use myself as an example. When I was a hiring manager, there were times, I will admit, where I looked at someone's name and made a decision based on how I thought that they would be included into the environment that I was working in. But it didn't feel good doing that. And I know that I'm not the only person having made a decision like that for whatever reason, good or bad. You feel it inside. So I think that, again, it goes back to us being willing to stay in conversations, being willing to, like Pierre said, recognize that if you don't have a personal experience, and I can only use the Black experience because that's the skin I live in, and I know the stereotypes and the myths and the lies that represent who we are as a collective people. But if you haven't had a personal experience with a Black person or a person of color, then you can't really say that you know that group of people. I'm trying to not go down this rabbit hole. So give me a second. So here's what I'm going to say really succinctly. Back to what I said earlier. Stay in the conversation. Take opportunities to meet people that are different than you are. Read your history. I think the first part of this is that people need to understand, especially in the Black experience, our experience didn't start in slavery. There were Africans before there were Africans enslaved in America. So I think that understanding who we were before we came to this country and then who we became after slavery far outweighs the negative impact that we have been kind of produced into society. And then the other thing is, I think this will help us come together even more, is that we need to also recognize and accept that some stereotypes are true and accept and embrace that. Because if we do that, then they stop stigmatizing us and making us react in a negative way, right? Ice Cube once said that fried chicken is a stereotype, but I like fried chicken. Basketball is a stereotype, but I like basketball. So just embrace those parts of us that are true, because it's a way for us to connect. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Are you done now?
Oh, wait, let me see. Not yet.
Deb, what do you think?
Well, that's kind of, I got to look at that in several ways. Stereotypes they're just what they are. I mean, I come from such a different background of multiculturalism and diversity. So, I've been called everything but a child of God. So, and by the best, may I say, by the best. So, I've had enemies in both sides, from Caucasians as well as African Americans, as well as people from other countries. So I just look at life a little differently. You either accept or you can't, and it is, unfortunately, it just, to me, biased. You're just, to a large degree, you're not going to change everybody, but if you can change that one person, it makes a difference. And I unfortunately, you can try as much as you want to, but I say go to the next one and say, hey, let's try to start from the beginning. And you know what? Let's remember when you were kids and you take the little pin and your next door neighbor would be your blood sister because you took blood and put it to each other. That was fun. And my next door neighbors were white. So, I didn't have a problem. So, but I will say there were families in our block that didn't like us. And, let's be straight, I'm a fair-skinned African American, and that was frowned upon by a lot of Caucasians in our area. They could take up the brown-skinned kids a little bit different. But I say we have to get past that, because I'm going to again say I have blood just like everybody else. And if someone needs something and I can help them, I get past that point. So I don't really, and I thank my mother for that. I have to say, I thank my mother, who is biracial, and she had a white father and a black mother, and she was born in the early 30s. So imagine what she went through to raise children and nieces and nephews to be all successful. So I just look at life in that manner. And she used to say, you're not going to change everybody. But if you change that one person, then you've done something good. Otherwise, she would say, shut up.
Yeah. Coach Jim, you and Jason get last thoughts in this hour. What are your last thoughts on our hour?
Well, stereotypical is, in dealing with stereotypes is, and because I came from the sports world, is that you look at, you just really have to be open to giving people the chances and seeing what their talents like. I mean, for many years it was said, African Americans or black people can't play golf. Well, there's this guy named Tiger Woods, and I think he kind of changed that perspective for a lot of people. So I think we got to learn from that history. Then, you go to recent right now, the Super Bowl. In the NFL right now, a wide receiver is predominantly played by African American players for the most part. And, white guys aren't supposed to be able to play wide receiver. Well, the MVP of the Super Bowl was a white wide receiver, Cooper Kupp. So I think that it's just really that we have to learn perspectives on the fact that, that we really got to be open that, there's no real stereotype, the sense that, that person can't break that barrier. And we've got to be open to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Jason, you got the last word, my friend.
Cool. Can I just read off my closing remarks, Dennis?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, good. So
He has no sense of humor, folks, none whatsoever.
I love Jason.
So listening to people who are different than us to get through our own biases is important, but also along with listening, I think what is often missed is we've got to, or we have an opportunity to ask people questions that help propel the conversation deeper. We can ask questions about the weather and surface questions for hours on end and never have a deeper conversation with someone. But if we can ask inspired questions and listen to the response and follow up with more inspired questions, wow, and they reciprocate, and wow, that can be a great conversation that starts shattering individual stereotypes all over the place, and that's really exciting.
Perfect. Well said, my friend. Thanks all of you for this this very powerful hour on inclusion. Audience folks, I hope you're enjoying yourselves. We'll be back in 5 minutes with our third subject, social justice.